before and after.
Thank you for attending this edition of AgileTalks. I'm really happy that this is happening. Like Julian was saying, 9 years ago, I used to organize this with Lucian Daniluk. Some of you might know him. At one point, I think 3 or 4 years ago, it kind of fizzled. We didn't gather that much anymore. And I just want to thank these guys and all the organizers for reviving the spirit in the past year. And I think they also deserve a warm hand. This is me. I have 2 hats, a big hat and a smaller hat. I'm a co-founder and the VP of Engineering at a company that has offices here in Timișoara, R&D, and headquarters in Italy. We build IT infrastructure products. And also from 2011, I worked as a coach and trainer with an Agile consultancy in Bucharest. Initially, I was full-time for about 4 years, and now I'm a collaborator. But the time I've spent with MosaicWorks has given me a very rare opportunity to work with some really incredibly smart people. And I have seen firsthand a lot of transitions, attempts of transitions. I have seen a lot of the teams fail. I have seen more teams succeed, luckily. And I'm here to talk about them today. And this talk is supposed to be half an hour. Initially, I think it was more than 1 hour because I think it's one of the most difficult talks I've ever given because I had to introspect and take a look at 10 years of experience and then distill the essence. But what I've learned is there's this model in the martial arts called Shuhari. It's a model for skills acquisition that basically says something like this. At first, you do things by the book. You practice fundamentals, right? Like the kibadachi, which is that's you need to sit like this, right? And you practice all the moves. You don't need to think about them. You just do them. You do things by the book. And then there's detach, which means break away and experiment. Try to make the moves yours. And finally, there are no rules at the re stage. You move without effort. You don't think about the move that you are doing. And I think my experience with Agile has been similar. At first, there's the shoe, right? Learning the mechanics. How do we organize the sprint planning? What's the role of the product owner? And after a while, you start to question things like, do we always need a Scrum Master? Or if we are a team of 3, does it really make sense to have a daily stand-up, right? The literature advises, story points, maybe we'd be better off with ideal days. And eventually, I think after a few years, you realize Agile in itself is not the code. It's a set of principles, it's a set of practices, and yes, you should apply them based on context. Is it a silver bullet? Probably not. If somebody was to ask me a few years back, would you apply Agile to any type of project, I would have said yes. Yes, this works in any context. But let me give you a couple of examples. My wife is the traditional project manager. She works in a fintech company. They do implementation services. What does that mean? They sell a product and they sell it to a bank. And it's a big product. It's a code base that hundreds of people have been working on for 30 years. So when they need to implement that, when the client needs to implement, they need to sell some implementation services. Somebody from their company goes to the bank and they spend some time tweaking and tuning things, developing 1 or 2 additional small features. They have been practicing waterfall successfully on that for 20 years, and it works for them. I wouldn't advise them to change it. The second example is from Syneto, my company. We are doing a massive technology overhaul right now. We have this engine that we have been working on for the past 10 years. And the product, we took a look at it strategically. We said, we want to keep it for another 10 years. So we need to revamp the engine to support the features that we have in mind. So we have this conundrum. Should we build it from scratch? Or should we use some open source technology and contribute to it? I don't see any way to do that incrementally, iteratively. So what we chose to do is instead use incremental budgeting. We took 2 of our smartest people. We said, try to figure out which version would be best. Should we build it from scratch? Should we use something that's open source? And we will meet every 2 months. You have all the freedom to organize the way you want. We will meet every 2 months. If you have made progress that we deem significant, we will fund the project for another 2 months. Now, if we are to abstract that idea a bit, there are 2 axes here, technology and requirements. The horizontal axis means how familiar are we with the technology in which we will implement a new project? Is it something that we've worked with? Is it something that we're not quite sure what we will be doing? Requirements, how big is the agreement between the stakeholders on the requirements? Are they fairly stable? Do we expect them to change? And the fintech example I just gave is somewhere around here. The technology is quite understood. There have been probably 100 implementations of it. The requirements, yes, they might change because every bank has a bit of tuning, but you can run it using a waterfall process, you can run it using a Gantt chart and pad 20%. I think they use 15 or 20% buffer. And most of the time for them it works. The second example, the one with the research, is over here. This is a zone known as anarchy. So we don't even know what technology we'll be using. And funny enough, the choice of technology will impact the choice of features. Because if I leverage open source, I will have some features built in. If I build it from scratch, I won't have them. So I'm not even sure on the requirements. So that means this is not very well suited for Agile. But in the mid is a type of project that's called complex. And this is Agile's sweet spot. There is a fair risk in the technology, but it's kind of stable. Like we're using the same technology stack, maybe we're implementing a new library, or we are refactoring a module. And the requirements, they might change. Maybe not everybody sees things the same way, so after 2-3 sprints, maybe we will add stories to the backlog. That's more or less Agile's sweet spot, at least in my experience. So I will share with you 5 lessons. That was just a bit of an intro to get you understanding the way I think about it right now. This is something that's called Castells. It's a practice in Catalonia. They can go up to 10 levels. So the first lesson is to build a good product, you first need to build a good team. Because there's this myth. Agile sounds so easy. Every team can do it. Every team can do it. Because after all, who wouldn't want to work in a team that's self-organizing and has a flat structure and all of that? But the reality is taking 5, 7, 4 people, putting them in a room at the same table does not make them a team. I think there are 3 prerequisites for a true Agile team. The first one is member selection or auto-selection. I have met a couple of individuals that would not work well in an Agile team. The first one came at work at 2 p.m. and left at 11 p.m. And the company that he worked for allowed for that. And he was really valuable to the company. The second one had 40 years of experience. And the way he used to work was you would give him a tough challenge. He would work for 1 month alone and then come back with something that most of the time was almost perfect. So we tried to put these 2 people into Agile teams. And what do you think happened to their productivity when we said, no, now you need to come at work every morning at 9, we will meet, we will do the stand-up, and you will tell us what you did yesterday, and all of that. It went down. So I'm going to give some advice that is maybe against the Agile orthodoxy here. So I'm sorry for those of you that maybe are newer to it and are still trying to do things by the book. Yeah. So, I don't think everybody is well suited for an Agile team. I think you should make an assessment at the beginning, and if there are this type of strong personalities, I think they are better off working as collaborators, consultants for the team. They can work in autonomy alone, or maybe they'd be better off in another team. Because I have seen how easy it is for them to bring down the team morale. Now, the second bit, adaptive leadership. There are these 4 stages in the evolution of a team. At first, we are forming, we don't get a lot of work done, but we are nice and kind to one another because there's no pressure. After a while, we enter the storming phase when people start asking, where are the results? And people tend to argue, and there's a lot of conflict. And unfortunately, some teams left stuck there, will remain stuck in that phase. But hopefully, they overcome it, and they reach the norming phase, in which I realize what are my strengths and weaknesses, I realize what my colleagues' strengths and weaknesses are, and we start to get along. And finally, ideally, we reach the performing phase, where we can really deliver. Now, I think it's really important, while the team is evolving, to have a different type of leadership, an adaptive type of leadership. Because Agile is all about self-organization and empowerment, but I believe that, for instance, during forming, you need a more directive type of leadership. Because there's this big void of authority once the team gets formed. And as we evolve, as we start to deliver and people start arguing, the leader can be a negotiator. They can try to reach agreement between members that are fighting and mediate that conflict. Then we are moving towards norming. We have understood what the relative strengths and weaknesses are, and now we're trying to figure out what's the best process for us. And in this phase, the leader should be a coach and ask questions. Why do we feel it's a good idea to have a 2-week sprint, for instance? And finally, once the team reaches performing, I think the leadership should be more of a facilitator type. Do you guys need anything? If not, just do your magic. And the third point is about communication. Now, I don't mean this the way our ruling party means communication, like every time they pass a stupid law, somebody will come and say, no, you didn't understand, it was a communication issue. It's not that. I mean it more technically. Like, are you able, as a team member, to enunciate your point in 1 minute so that everybody can understand it? Because if you don't do that, what will happen is we will have these long, dull, boring meetings. And you see people going to these sprint meetings like they're going to the guillotine. And everybody is wondering whether they still have enough battery on the phone to overcome the 4 hours or what have you. Okay, second one. The slides move automatically so that I don't go that long. Early on in my Agile journey, I used to think that a lot of things will be going away, wireframes and architectures and all of that. And I had this architect friend, and I would tell him, you know what, your job will be gone in 5 years. Once this Agile thing catches on, in which we do everything during coding, there won't be architecture, there won't be any type of design anymore. And I call that Agile naivety, because we have taken some good, or we have taken a stance against some bad practices, like do all the design up front, or put all the decisions in one person, or write endless reams of documents. And it's good that we took that stance. But then we went too far, and instead of saying no big design up front, we said no design up front. Instead of saying empower teams, we said get rid of all managers. Instead of saying docs should be written to serve goals, we said code is the documentation. Well, good luck coming into our code base that has 100,000 lines of code and figuring out what it does and why. Eventually, I have started to believe that you need to separate the two types of activities. The design or discovery type of activity, like interaction design, big level architecture, from the actual delivery, code, test, build, deploy. Yeah, this is kind of agile anathema, but you'll see what I mean. Couple of stories. 2015, we are working on this feature. And yeah, we want to do it really agile, so we gather, we talk about it half an hour, and we start working. And what happened was, everybody had this sense that we should get it done in a couple of weeks. 1.5 months later, we were still working on it. Why? Because we would come at the end of the sprint, we would take a look at it and say, this is not right. This doesn't accommodate that particular use case. We need to redo the experience one more time, and we did it 3 times. So after 1.5 months, what we did, we sat down and we said, we will spend a couple of days as a team, not touching any keyboards. We sat at the whiteboard, and we started drawing mock-ups and all of that. And only when we stopped to do the design up front, to really get alignment between all of us on what we wanted to do, then we were able to finish it in 2 weeks. And the second example is about architecture. At one point we were working on a feature, and that feature involved, this is going to get a bit technical, but don't worry about the details, files, shares, and block volumes. And these are 2 things that we give to our clients so that they can put data on. And on both of them, we're running virtual machines. And we needed to keep a list of the virtual machines that were running on each. Now the thing is, on file systems, it's very easy to keep files. On volumes, it's almost impossible. So when we started developing, how should we store the VMs? Okay, let's do it as files, because this was the first user story. And we stored the list of VMs on files, and everything was great. And then we moved to the block device, and we said, okay, how do we put files on block devices? We don't know. Okay, let's descope it. So eventually we ended up implementing half of the feature. 4 months later, we realized that the underlying storage that we were using for everything had something called custom attributes. And both of these things had custom attributes. So we could have used the custom attributes to put the list of VMs. And we could have delivered the full feature. But under the tyranny of the sprint, what did we do? We said, okay, this is the most that we can do. So I think this is a type of example that shows kind of the limits of this idea that architecture can always emerge. Right? Because we tend to say with Agile, if you have enough clean code, if you know your refactoring, if your code is decoupled, architecture will just emerge. Well, guess what? I don't personally think that if you did a code base as a monolith with stored procedures deployed on Azure and using Angular, and if you want to move it to microservices and process data in code on Amazon and using React as a front end, it will be that easy to change. So these days, kind of what I tend to do and advise is separate discovery from delivery. And we've got here 2 months, like 9, it's 9 sprints. It's something like 4 months, 4.5 months for 2-week sprints. And what you would do is start with a design beforehand. Like, figure out the interaction design, go through a series of architecture reviews, and let it settle down. And then this is a place where we would do splitting, and then you can start implementing. Now, a cool property of this is that it allows this Zygarnik, I don't know, it's a Russian psychologist, and he realized that whenever we've got a problem that we didn't that we didn't solve, basically, our brain will continue to work in the background, even if we're not consciously thinking about it. So what that means is, if I have enough time, 1 week, 2 weeks, and my first step at the design of a feature, I'm not really satisfied with it, I will have enough time, my brain will have enough time, 1, 2, 3 days to come up with better solutions. But when you are during the sprint, and you need to deliver because you have hard committed or soft committed to the contents of the sprint, quite often you will need to go with the first choice that you made. Okay, third one, technical skills. There's this myth. We're doing Scrum or we're doing Kanban, so we're Agile. And quite often it means we meet up at coffee every morning, and that's why we're doing Scrum. But I think Martin Fowler captured the essence of this type of view with this term, classic Scrum. And he basically says something like this. I've seen a lot of teams recently that picked Scrum, they adopted the practices, maybe even the principles, but after a while progress is slow because the code base is a mess. I was fortunate enough when I started with Agile that the first team I worked on, we started with the XP practices. We started with unit testing, with continuous integration, with test-driven development, and only then we moved to Scrum. So nowadays, I think these four are prerequisites. Clean code. I mean, if we're going to keep coming back to the same piece of code because we keep on adding stories as we build the feature, it better best describe its intent. Decoupling. One of the reasons we end up with some sprints that have a lot of user stories at 90% done is that we cannot work, more developers cannot work on the same piece of code because it's not structured like that. So you really need finely grained, decoupled modules and classes in order to be able to swarm at the end of the sprint. At the end of the sprint, 3-4 developers on the same user story. Refactoring, I think this is one of those things that everybody knows they can do, but actually surprisingly few do. Because with refactoring, most people understand rewriting. We will need a refactoring sprint, or a refactoring month, or the biggest I've seen, a refactoring half year. But in fact, refactoring is a series of mechanical transformations. It's 20, 30 mechanical transformations like inline variable. That's what you need to get good at. And finally, test automation. I don't know how you can be agile and not have test automation, because otherwise what you will end up after a few sprints is, if you want to keep 100% test coverage, is test through the entire sprint. So then what we end up doing, if we don't automate, is we're going to select a few test cases that we're going to run. And we're going to do some exploratory testing, and hopefully that will be enough. This is part of the reason why in Waterfall we relegated testing as a phase at the end, because if you really want to get 100, 80%, 90% coverage in testing, it's going to take a long period of time. So without test automation, I don't really see how you could be doing sprints. I think a lot of people believe that Agile is meant for a small team. Or now with the advent of things like SAFe and less, for a lot of teams working together, but mainly in the software development area, maybe at the product level. But guess what? And yeah, this was the second slide. Here comes the manager and says, we're going to put a bit of Agile over here on the software development, and everything's going to be okay. But the fact is, all companies are complex systems. All departments are linked between them. So, okay, that's great. The software guys, the development team, will start doing Agile, and every 2 weeks, they want to do a demo to the client. Well, guess what? The salespeople, or marketing, whoever has the contact with the market, need to go to those clients and say, hey, would you like to see a demo every 2 weeks? Do you have the 2 or 3 hours it takes to get in your car, come to our headquarters, and see the demo and then drive back? Or maybe we're going to do it remote, etc. The thing is, all of these departments are influenced. This is what it takes, I feel, in order to reap the true benefits of agility. In HR, you need to change, and these are all examples. I mean, for everyone, it's a lot more, but I just took one for each and every one. HR, performance management. We have processes that favor individual performance, and now we're telling teams to act as teams. So what do we need to change in performance management? Finance. Publicly traded companies need to recognize revenue. How do you do it when you develop incrementally? Product management. They need to set aside 1, 2, 3 days maybe every week in order to work close together with the development team. Marketing. Marketing is used to having the clear spec, writing their documentation, their case study, etc., etc. How will they work when we're not really sure what we're going to deliver at the end of the release? Sales. Maybe we need to change the contracts. Maybe we've been selling fixed scope, fixed price, and now we need to move to time and materials. And finally, budgeting. I have met this large organization that used to do 5-year budgets. So how on earth will you have a 5-year budget and also be able to do Agile at the same time? But what's really interesting is that other than the fact that you need to change all of these departments, also the change needs to come from the top down and from the bottom up. From the top down, because only as you move high enough in the organization, you have access to changes that will affect multiple departments. So if we need to change the processes of sales so that we can bring the clients to the demo, only as you are high enough in the organization, you will be able to make those changes, or maybe the HR policies. But at the same time, if you do it only top down and don't have the buy-in of the people that will be doing the actual work, if they don't understand why we are trying to change, what is it that we're hoping to achieve? Is it better quality, more clients, productivity? That initiative is doomed to fail. 5th point. If any of you know the guys that did Agile marketing and chose the brand names, please get us in touch. I mean, if I'm a manager that doesn't understand a lot about Agile, but then I hear that my company will gain agility, and teams will be constantly sprinting, where do I sign? Because, you know, there are these 2 myths. We adopt Agile, we're going to produce more. But sure, because we'll be sprinting all the time. And also because people will meet every morning and will tell what they did the day before. Well, this is the best project management tool ever. But here's what happens. This is from a few years back. A team was transitioning, this was after 4 or 6 sprints. So I asked them, after this time, how did various things change for you? Every line is one person. Relatedness, do you feel closer to your colleagues? Mastery, do you feel that now you can learn more, etc.? And what was most interesting to me was this column, the freedom one. 1 means it has improved, 0 stayed the same, -1, it has decreased. And this was the worst. That's weird, because we're saying now you're going to be self-organizing, you're going to have so much freedom, yay! But in fact, they felt it quite the opposite. Because what tends to happen is, if poorly misunderstood, managers will say, this thing, Scrum, will get us more work done. So it will increase the productivity, and that's great. But when you factor in the cost to track things, to report, all the meetings that we need to add up on top of it, the motivation that will be decreasing for some people, I wonder, is it really here where we will get more profit from it? And you might have guessed that I don't believe so. I think actually productivity comes because we have this potentially shippable product increment. I think this is what derives productivity in Agile. The fact that we have developed this capability as an organization to give a tool to the product owner. And he will take this tool, this ability to ship every 2 weeks, potentially ship every 2 weeks, to optimize the product that we're putting on the market. Because guess what? We're not optimizing for the number of lines of code that we're writing. We're optimizing for the market fitness. And maybe with another process that doesn't have so many meetings, I don't know, you would have gotten 50% more features. But chances are those features are less suited for what you are trying to achieve. So productivity comes from tailoring the product to the client needs. And I think, and I'm close to finish, a very good skill that product owners need to develop is learn how to do rolling wave planning. This is something that we've been experimenting with for the past year. Basically, we take a look at the roadmap, we take a look at the next 3 months, roughly, and we say, what are the features, the big features that we'd like to do? We do swag, if you know what that means, scientific wild-ass guess. And we say, oh, this is going to take 3 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever. And that kind of gives a bit of return on investment information to the product owner. And we say, we're going to do it like this, feature 1, feature 2, maybe this has a budget of 4 weeks, maybe this has a budget of 3 weeks, and this has a budget of 5 weeks, or something like that. And then, when we approach every feature, this is where we will do splitting for feature 1, this is where we will do splitting for feature 2, and for feature 3. And this is the amount of stories that we have in the backlog. And this keeps going down as we finish the feature number 1. And after that we split some more, and we do the feature number 2, etc. But this is what we get. At this point, we can decide. What do? We take a look at the feature and we say, can we release it? Does it look good? And if not, what choices do we have? Well, we could steal some budget from feature 2 and make this shorter and move this over here. Or the product owner could go back to the business and say, you know what, we're going to move this a bit longer and give us some 10% more budget. Okay, last slide. In a nutshell, I think the things that are more important from Agile are the values and the principles. And that's the thing that you should remain with. The practices, the processes, Kanban, Scrum, TDD, whatnot, they're all good. Like, you should learn them. You should try to do it by the book. But then, don't stop. Branch out. Experiment, right? If you're doing things the same way like you did them 2 years ago, maybe it's time to evaluate, right? Figure out what works best for your company. Figure out how to tweak all of these processes to your particular context. And then maybe come here and share with us what you have learned, right? Because I think, after all, that's what inspect and adapt really mean at the end. Thank you.